Casey.
Continuity. You might put it down.
No clapperboard here, you'll notice.
Let me go over there.
No, these amateurs are all the same. No, clapperboard.
First of all, I'd like you to introduce yourself and say what you were at the Abbey Cinerama. So you say Jim Wood, I was head projectionist and so on. So just introduce yourself.
My name's Jim Wood. I was one of the projectionists at Abbey Cinerama when it first opened in February 1964. I arrived on the scene before Cinerama was actually commissioned, going straight from the Rialto Cinema in Liverpool, which closed a matter of weeks before Cinerama opened. I was headhunted before Cinerama opened, and consequently when the rank organisation made me redundant, I walked straight into Cinerama, which was quite handy, so I never lost anything. The Cinerama itself was done on the cheap, because it was not like the Cinerama I had seen in the early 50s at the London Casino. I went down there as an apprentice for the rank organisation on a course, and one of the sort of surprises was to be taken backstage at the London Casino, which was then running Cinerama, and they had these wonderful American Century machines in 3 separate projection rooms and a big console in the middle. So when the operation in Liverpool opened and I was given the opportunity to work there, I thought, this is going to be spectacular. I wonder which projection booth I'll be in. Anyhow, lo and behold, the Abbey Cinerama was done on the cheap, and we only had 1 projection booth with 3 projectors in it. So consequently, the first thing to suffer was the sight lines, because whereas you had in London with 3 separate booths, you had a good straight shoot from the projector to the screen. But at the Abbey, of course, the 3 projectors were closer together, so the picture was slightly distorted and not as good as it should have been, as we saw it in London or to the theatres. But nevertheless, it did the job.
I believe at the Casino Cinerama in London, they had a device to get the feed spool up to the top of the projector.
They did.
What did they have in the Abbey Cinerama?
Well, when I first saw the mechanism at the casino, they had this winch, and you pressed a button, and an electric winch lifted the spool up to the top of the machine, and all the projectors had to do was to guide the spool on and clip it on. And this was planned to be on at the Abbey, but instead of having an electric winch, we were going to have a chain winch. But of course, with great British finesse, they realised that the roof was too low, so they couldn't put the full-size spool box touching the roof, so they had to cut a bit of the roof away to get the machine in. So consequently, there was just no room for a winch. So it took 2 of us then to lift the spool onto the top spindle of the machine. So the feed spool, in actual fact, went through the roof, only by 6 or 7 inches, but you had to tilt the spool up into the roof to get it onto the machine. So it had to be done manually, because there just wasn't the height to get a winch in. Got lovely muscles out of it. I mean, it was part of the fun of Cinerama, but the only problem being, of course, when you had a winch, you could guide it in nicely. When you're throwing the spool up manually, you're always at risk of pushing the machine over. So it was very, very awkward. And of course, at Liverpool, we were pointing uphill instead of a perfect sight line. We were up, only a couple of degrees up, but it was up, and that made the machines unsteady the other way as well. But there we are. That's a good story, that one.
How long did each of the reels actually last for then?
Well, depending upon the film you had, because you had a part 1 and part 2. The early ones are about 40 minutes, then 45 minutes. So on an average, 45 minutes per reel. So if you work it out, part 1 and part 2, it was 90 minutes. So that was the average feature length at the time. You could squeeze a bit more on, but once you got coming over the edge of the spool, it was practically impossible to lift the spool up there onto the machine, and you always had the risk of film falling off the top of the spool.
I believe each of the projectors were called by a particular name.
Abel, Baker and Charlie. Mine was Charlie. I suppose they thought, yeah, he's a right Charlie, we'll give him that machine. And the 3 machines, Abel, Baker and Charlie, Abel showed at an angle and crossed the beams of Baker, and mine Charlie. So whereas mine was the extreme left-hand projector, I showed the extreme right hand of the picture. Abel was at the extreme right hand of the box and showed the extreme left hand of the picture, and Baker was in the middle. Mine was always the brightest bit.
Did you have any favourite 3-screen Cinerama films that you had?
I think it's got to be the original This Is Cinerama, because that was so new, it was so different. There's no story to it, it was just pure fantasy.
I believe, wasn't there a bit of a panic leading up to the premiere night?
Oh, there was in Liverpool, because when I arrived at Cinerama, the theatre was being converted from a single screen cinema, conventional cinema, into this super wide luxury theatre. Incidentally, the Abbey was the first cinema to have a bar, a licensed bar, behind the screen. And the whole theatre was altered to accommodate the screen, so they used the space behind the screen as a bar. When I got there, the machines were coming from, they were built in Italy by Cinemeccanica. They were adapted, Cinemeccanica Victoria 8s, to run Cinerama. They were on the docks in Rotterdam, and there was a dock strike. So the machines were stuck there, and they only arrived in Liverpool literally 3 or 4 days before the opening night, because we couldn't get hold of the gear. And of course, when you try to rush an installation, that's when the problems arise. And we had seize-ups, we had problems left, right and centre. We couldn't get the machines to interlock. Or you could write a book or make a film about just the problems alone of installing Cinerama. But there was a good crew installating it. There was I can't remember the chap's name now. I think his name was Sweeney. He came up from Cinerama London with his Oppo, and they sort of oversaw the installation. There were so many problems, they had to bring a mechanic from Cinemeccanica in Milan over. They flew him over at a moment's notice to iron out the problems we were having, because Cinemeccanica had never done a Cinerama conversion. They were expecting their machines to run normally, but of course Cinerama wanted them to run half as fast again. The wear and tear associated with the machine running at nearly twice the normal speed is horrendous, and the machine just weren't capable of it. But they managed to solve most of the problems, and they only had to last just over 12 months, so there was no real problems.
You didn't know that at the time?
We didn't know that at the time, because we thought Cinerama was going to run forever. We'd always hoped that the Cinemeccanicas would be thrown out, and we'd go back to the American Century machines, which the casino had, but no, we were the poor relatives. We had to make do with Cinemeccanica, which, with all due respect, Cinemeccanica was one of the finest projectors ever made, but they were expected to do a job which they were never designed to do. So consequently, their shortcomings showed up in no real way, But I mean, they lasted, and when they were converted back to ordinary running for a 70mm Cinerama, they lasted for many years. Even when Cinerama closed, the machines were sold off, and they were used for many years in other different cinemas. My projector, Charlie, when they closed down the 3-strip Cinerama, Charlie went to Tel Aviv to go in a conventional cinema, and that was readapted from Cinerama to ordinary use.
Weren't the projectionists at the Abbey Cinerama paid more money than normal projectionists?
Oh, we were highly paid. I mean, I think at the Rialto, if memory serves me correctly, I was on about £11 or £12 a week. I was on £15 a week at the Abbey, so we were on American wages. It was great. We were the highest paid projectionists on Merseyside at the time, and it was good, and we were envied, but by God, we worked for our extra money, believe you me, because the hours were horrendous, and we had a big crew. You never knew who you were going to be on with, and you had other people messing with your machine. It would be nice if they said, look, you're going to come in every day for the week, and this is your machine, nobody else is going to touch it. But it didn't work out that way. I'd set my machine up, Charlie, to the way I wanted it. I'd have a day off or a shift off. I'd come back and it was all altered. It was all messed about, something rotten. But there we are. Everybody has their own way of doing
so
things.
There were times then when there might be some disaster when you're projecting. Were there any sort of mistakes?
I think the mistakes were all due to the the technology we had at the time. You've got to remember, we're talking about a 1950s cinema technology. Things are slightly different now. Let's start off at the bottom rather than the top. When a machine with such a huge big spool starts up, the whip from the take-up spool was horrendous. No matter how much you tried to guide it round, it was still a big whip. We didn't have polyester film. It was sheer acetate-based film, which snapped very easily. So on numerous occasions, when the machine started, the take-up spool was round and snapped the film. The whole lot then would have to stop while you had to rethread and get them all back in synchronization again. And remember, it wasn't just the 3 machines, you had the sound machine as well. So when you stopped, you had then to resynchronize everything and make sure the correct frame was in each of the 3 projectors, and then find the footage number on the film and marry that up with the magnetic coated film on the sound reader, and then try and get them to lock into synchronization again. As you lock them on electronically, one machine inevitably would jump and throw the others out, so you'd be back to square one and start again. The longest time we were ever off the screen due to interlock problems was about 40 minutes, trying to get the machines into synchronization. And then when you did, it was great, they ran beautifully, but it was getting them there. And when you did have a major breakdown and you managed to rethread them up and you weren't as accurate as you should have been, even if you were 1 frame out, you've got to remember you've got 3 images. Let's just say a helicopter is taking off, and you'd get the 2 ends of the helicopter taking off and the middle would stay there, or vice versa. But that did happen on quite a few occasions. You know.
What would you say is the magic of Cinerama as opposed to, say, IMAX today?
You've got to remember, IMAX was built basically for the 90s. Cinerama was built in a technology which is 40 years older, we're talking about the 1950s. It even predates CinemaScope. IMAX is wonderful in the respect that you've got no match lines, which we had in Cinerama. But by the same token, Cinerama was intended, if you look straight ahead, you take your fingers out as far as you possibly could, that was the coverage of Cinerama. And same goes for your eyes, top and bottom. With IMAX, you're looking up and down, and IMAX is too big, whereas Cinerama was designed perfectly to suit your optical needs. Alright, we lacked possibly the detail that IMAX had, but we had the spectacle. We held the record of the number of people that fainted on the first night at Liverpool. We opened up with this as Cinerama, and if you've never seen Cinerama opening done properly, you haven't seen anything. It starts off with a chap called Lowell Thomas giving you a prologue, an introduction to Cinerama. You can be sitting in the theatre, the lights go down, and these curtains open up to about so far, and a little tiny screen appears. Pardon me. And Lowell Thomas comes on and gives you a brief history of the cinema and filmmaking in general. And he comes out with these immortal words, and now, ladies and gentlemen, you're about to see the wonder of the age. This is Cinerama. And the picture fades out. And then a picture fades in, and it's the size of a football. So everybody's leaning forward to see what's on this football. And what you don't realise, when you're straining your eyes forward to see what you're looking at, the huge screen is opening up, which you don't notice because it's ultra quiet, the curtains, they're opening up and up and up. And this football gets slightly bigger every so often. And you're looking forward in your seat, what is this? And of course it's out of focus as well. And you can't make out, you know there's movement there, but you don't know what you're looking at. Then all of a sudden it jumps into focus and it goes a little larger. You think, we're on a roller coaster. And just as you realise that, the other machine's kicking and you're on it and you're going downhill. So you've got this huge spectacle, and it comes so suddenly that on the opening night we had 3 faintings and 5 throw-ups. So it was, and we held the record. Nobody else in the country could boast that they had so many people carted away. And one of the advertising features of the Liverpool Cinerama was St John's Ambulance Brigade or the British Red Cross are always on duty. And it went down well. We had write-ups in the paper of how many people were carted off to the ambulance. It was good publicity for us.
Would you say one of the trouble that Cinerama had was that they didn't have enough product in the end? And it was getting too expensive.
Oh, it was horrendous. I mean, I said earlier on it only lasted 12 months. We didn't intend it to last 12 months. We thought it would run forever, because so many of the major companies thought this is the answer. MGM wanted to have a go, Columbia, Warner, they all wanted to have a go at it, but when they saw the costs, you're talking about releasing a film which is costing you 4 times the amount of an ordinary film. So they were sort of very loath to invest in it. So what we were doing basically was running the films that were made. This is Cinerama, Seven Wonders. We only had about half a dozen real films that were made for Cinerama, apart from the features such as How the West Was Won and Brothers Grimm. And then of course, when they dried up, we had to start rerunning the best of Cinerama, by public demand of course. We had to say by public demand because people would say, well, why are they running it again? We had nothing else to run. We were waiting, thinking that Mad World was coming out in 3-strip. Mad World was eventually released, but it came out as 70mm single strip Cinerama, which lacked the impact, it lacked the size, and it certainly lacked the sound quality which we were giving on 3-strip Cinerama.
You've just mentioned the sound. The sound is particularly good on Cinerama films. What was that? The system was especially made for it, was it?
It was using fully coated 35mm film, and the magnetic tracks ran in synchronization with the film projectors. So consequently, the running speed of the film, the sound tapes ran at the same speed, giving you a higher frequency response. So it's absolutely superb. We had full stereo, far superior to the stereophonic sound you got with CinemaScope. Classic example was one of the very early Cinerama experiments, which was included in actual fact on the release version of This Is Cinerama, and it was shot in black and white. These are the choir boys walking down the side of the theatre, and the sound followed them. You couldn't see them because they were out of your vision, but you could hear them coming around the back of your head almost. And when they appeared on the screen, the extreme edges, the sound followed them. And this was shot in an old Australian baths. I'm not sure it was in New York or somewhere. They took over this old building and converted it to a studio just for this one sequence of the choir boys. It was absolutely fantastic. It was so successful that even though it was in black and white, they kept it in for This Is Cinerama.
The Cinerama screen itself is not, I can imagine, a solid screen, is it?
Oh no, it comprised a little louvre about 1 inch wide, and there was literally hundreds of them. If you can imagine the width of the screen, and they're all made up in inch wide strips overlapping, because this was the only way you could get the curvature. If you had there's no way you could get a completely wide curved screen in one piece. So you had these miniature, like vertical Venetian blinds all the way round, and you had to change these because they were very sort of prone to discolouring. In the 12 months we ran 3-strip Cinerama, we changed the screen twice. Even though cinemas, you can't smoke in them now, but in those days you could, and the stuff we were using on these screen louvres was very prone to discolouring from nicotine and cigarette smoke, so we had to change it if you wanted the best out of it.
Yeah.
Not like a certain Manchester Cinerama which didn't, and from the day they closed they were projecting onto a nicotine stained screen. Mind you what you expect from Manchester. Haven't even got a good football team, have they?
How many Cinerama cinemas were there then in England?
Oh, offhand I can't remember, but the Liverpool one was twinned with Cardiff, would you believe, because we both opened on the same day. Well, it was planned to open on the same day. There was a slight difference in the opening time. We kicked off, and they were the second installation to have Cinemechanica machines.
Yeah.
So we were having so many problems that sort of delayed Cardiff going on, so they wanted to iron out our problems. Then when Cardiff opened, they had hopefully no problems. In actual fact, they had more problems than we did on the opening night. Our opening night ran very, very smoothly when you come to consider it. We had no breaks or stoppages. In fact, we had no breaks for the first 2 or 3 weeks.
I believe the opening night was quite a big occasion. With
we had the pipers, we had everything. It wasn't the biggest things to hit Liverpool for many, many years, of course. I mean, it was, even though the Abbey was a well-known cinema, it was part of the Wood Circuit, which was a well-known small independent circuit. They had some good cinemas. But this was the first time anything as spectacular as this had opened up for many, many years. And the local papers had a full-page spread opening, announcing the opening of Cinerama. And you must have probably seen the cuttings and that. And it was good. We felt very, very proud that we were at the forefront of cinema entertainment at the time. It was good.
So, when did you actually leave Cinerama, the Abbey Cinerama?
I left when they went over to single strip.
That meant they didn't need so many projectionists.
They didn't need so many projectionists. And by this time I was feeling, even though it was a big cinema, a big company, to me it lacked the circuit feel. It was an independent cinema, the Abbey. It was on lease to Cinerama, but it was still an independent cinema. I'd always been used to working for the Rank organisation, which had Odeon and Gaumont cinemas. It was a big circuit which was really well organised. The booking films was no problem. Of course, Cinerama we had problems because we hadn't got the product to show. You never knew how long you would be waiting for a film, and you'd be hanging on and say, you'll have to extend it for another week or so. The other stuff's not ready. And it was all this uncertainty. So when the opportunity came to go over to single strip and they didn't need so many projections, I was really glad to get out of it then. And I went back to the Rank organisation and sort of carried on my career as a conventional cinema.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed the days at Cinerama. They were very sort of fraught with problems and worries and everything else. The money was brilliant, the spectacle was even greater, and I thoroughly enjoyed Cinerama. And now, of course, you can see Cinerama if you go to Pictureville in Bradford. They are still running Cinerama there once a month, and if you've never seen it...
Have you been back to see it then?
I have been back to see it. Technology has changed. Whereas before we had to have, see how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 projectionists to get a picture on the screen, the Abbey. We had a projectionist upstairs to show the prologue. You had the 3 projectionists on Abel, Baker and Charlie, and somebody responsible for the sound follower. So it took 5 of us to get a picture on the screen. Now, the way it's done at Pictureville in Bradford, you need 1 projectionist because there's no prologue as such. Not as a separate film. The machines are all computer controlled, they haven't got the snatch, everything's on polyester based film, there's no carbon arcs, which we had carbon arcs. They've got all xenon lighting now, whereas we had to be very careful. We had to get the best out of the carbon arcs to illuminate the picture. Now they don't, they just press a button and away you go. So yeah, it still has the same effect, but of course they're showing it not on our screen. To show it on an IMAX type screen, and that lacks the same impact that you got from Cinerama. The picture's not as big. People will argue that it's not as bright. It lacks the detail we were able to give. But other than that, I suppose you still get the magic of Cinerama, and there's nothing more magical than when you're on that roller coaster for the first time. If you've never seen it and you're sitting in the right seat, you're in for the thrill of a lifetime. It really is brilliant.